Welcome to Lesson 10. Here we will begin our discussion on various sheet functions with logical function. Logical function tests a specific cell or group of cells against a set of conditions and either return just a true or false value or use the results to trigger certain events. There are three basic logical operators: the not, the or, and the and operator. Google Sheets implements them as the not, the or, and the and functions respectively. These, together with the if and else statements, make up a bulk of logical functions. Other logical functions are obtained by combining these and or nesting them. By nesting, we mean embedding one or more functions into another function by supplying it or them as an argument. Logical functions make use of the comparison operators that were discussed in the previous lesson. The table shown summarizes the operations of the and, or, and not logical function as well as their syntax. To return a true value for the and function, all the logical expression provided must resolve to true, and to return the false, at least one of the logical expressions must resolve to false. Its syntax is as shown. With the or function, a true value is returned if any of the provided logical expression is true, and returns false if all of the provided logical expressions are false. The not function returns the opposite value of whatever the provided logical expressions resolve to. So as an expression that is true will return false, and a false expression will return true. The syntax is as shown. The if function evaluates one logical expression and returns one value if the value is true and another if it is false. Its syntax is as shown. This function takes three arguments. The first argument, the logical expression, is the condition to be used for the evaluation. The second, the value if true, is the action to perform or the value to return if the condition is satisfied. And the last, value if false, is the action to perform or the value to return if the condition is not satisfied. In our example, we want to calculate the sales tax only if the tax is 15%. Otherwise, we want to leave it blank. If you need to evaluate multiple logical expressions, you can nest multiple if statements in a single formula. The other if functions will typically be inserted as the second, or more commonly, the third argument, or even both. In our example, we will want to return A as the grade if the score is 80 and above, B if it is between 70 and 80, and C if it is below 70. The formula will check for the first condition. If it is not met, it will check for the second condition as stated in the second if statement. If the condition is also not met, it checks for the third condition as stated in the third if statement. Since no argument is provided for when the third condition is not met, it will just return an empty cell. The if function can be combined with the and, or, and not function, either separately or combined. We will look at examples of these, starting with the and function nested within an if function. The and function is the most popular member of the logic function family. It comes in handy when you have to test several conditions and make sure that all of them are met before carrying out the same action. In this example, our formula checks if the values of D1, D2, and D3 are greater than 0, and if they all are, then it will sum the values in B2 to B10. Else, even if one fails this test, it will return the string nothing. We continue with an example of an or function nested in an if function. Here, our formula checks if the value in either cell D1, D2, or D3 is greater than 0, and then calculates the sum of the values in B2 to B, when at least one does. But if all of the logical expressions are false, the formula will return the string nothing. Okay, let's take things up the notch. In Sheets, nothing prevents you from using the if function with both the and or functions together in a single formula if your business logic requires this. There are infinite variations of such a combination. One variation will be explored in this example. In the scenario presented here, we want to return the sum of data in column B if either of the two conditions is met. This logical test is encapsulated in an OR function. The two conditions to be considered for this test themselves are each a logical test evaluated using AND function. All the values in the columns D are greater than 0 and column E are less than 0. If either of the AND functions is true, then the data in B would be summed. Else, if both AND functions return false, then the result will be nothing. You can now try your hands on more complex logical functions. Next is the true or false function. At the beginning of this lesson, we learned that logical functions return either true or false. This may then be used as a trigger for other events. True and false, however, exist as functions on their own though. But unlike most functions, they don't take any argument. They only return themselves. So this will return true and this will return false. They exist so that they can be used in other spreadsheet functions. And so there is usually no reason to call just a true or false function on its own. Let's consider an example where these functions can be used. Say you manage students and need to determine whether each student's score meets a certain standard. You can do so by using the formula that returns true if the score is equal to or above a threshold, and false if it's below. The formula will be as shown. The last logical function to be discussed is the is function, but that is not entirely right because there is no is function. Actually, this is a set of functions that combine is with other words, specifically blank, even, error, odd, NA, URL, text, ref, number, email, date, non-text, formula, logic, between, and ERR. You can think of the is part as a common prefix. Each is function, the value supplied is evaluated to see if it matches the type as described by the second word. The function then returns true if matches and false otherwise. The is function are pretty self-explanatory. Is blank checks if the cell is blank. Is even checks if the value is even. Is error checks if the specified cell returns an error. Is odd checks if the value is odd. Is NA checks if the cell returns an NA error. Is number checks if the value is a number. Is URL checks if the value is a URL. Is text checks if the value is a text string. Is ref checks if the value is a valid cell reference. Is ERR checks if the value is an error other than NA. Is date checks if the value is a date. Is formula checks if the value is a formula. Is email checks if the value is an email. Is non-text checks if the value is non-textual. Is logical checks if the value is true or false. Is between checks if the value falls within the specified range. With the exception of is between function, which takes 4 arguments, all other is function takes only 1. The GIF shown illustrates the use of some most common is functions. And with that, we conclude our lesson on the logical function. I hope you're having as much fun with these functions as I am. There are more interesting things still to come. Move on to the next lesson to continue.